The auctioneer dropped the gavel at $50, and the loudest man on the lot laughed at him in front of the whole crowd. Warren Cole did not laugh back. He just lowered his hand, the bid already his, and looked at what he had bought, a massive, rusted iron strongbox standing dead on the gravel at the end of the row. An old express and freight money chest, waist high on heavy cast iron legs and skids. A big rectangular thing of iron straps riveted over thick oak, its sides gone red with rust, a domed, corroded lid, and a great seized lock and hasp, so heavy it had taken two men leaning to so much as tip it up onto the gravel. A chest the whole county had already written off as a dead lump of iron nobody alive could move or open, that 100 bidders had walked past and waved off as worthless scrap seized shut for good, and that Warren had just paid $50 to own, rust and frozen lock and all. It was a bright, clear Saturday morning, the kind of hard light that comes off a gravel lot at the end of summer. At a county estate auction held in the grassy yard beside a weathered gray barn on the edge of a small mountain town. Warren was 72 years old, broad through the shoulders and thick through the forearms even now, with a deeply lined face gone sun-brown and weathered, short iron-gray hair under a flat wool cap, gray stubble, and pale steady eyes that did not move fast. His hands were broad and burned, scarred across the backs, the knuckles swollen from a lifetime at the anvil, the hands of a man who had spent 50 years bending iron other men only ever hauled. Warren had worked that trade his whole life, a blacksmith and ironworker, the one they sent for when a thing had to be forged true and forged to last. Until the shops went to bolted steel and welded plate, and the old men who could set a lock by hand were quietly let go. The man who laughed was Dale Kessler, who ran the biggest scrap-and-salvage yard in 3 counties, a heavy-set man of about 55 in a loud red-plaid work jacket he wore to be seen in, his face clean-shaven and ruddy, a thick gold ring on one hand and a cigar in the other. $50, Dale said, loud so the whole lot could hear it. $50 for a rusted-shut iron pig, old-timer. Look at the size of the thing. Legs rusted to the skids, lid froze down, lock seized so hard a torch won't touch it, and it took 2 men just to stand it up. Nobody's had that open since before the war, and nobody's going to. It's too heavy to haul, too rusted to crack, and empty as a drum besides. The freight line stripped these bare before they scrapped the route. You didn't buy a strongbox, you bought 1,000 pounds of dead iron, and you paid $50 for the privilege of finding somewhere to dump it. He coined the name right there, loud enough to carry, the Iron Pig, and it stuck for the rest of that month. The crowd laughed because Dale laughed, the way a crowd does. Warren stood through it without a change in his face, his thumbs hooked in his apron strings, and let the laughter pass, the way weather passes a man who has decided to stand in it. Now, if you have ever watched a quiet, capable man get talked over by a loud one, if you have ever known somebody whose skill the world used when it needed something built and forgot the rest of the time, then you already understand what this channel is about, and you might take a second to subscribe. Because the people who stay for stories like Warren's are exactly who Iron Hook Stories was built for. Warren said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that work does not answer to noise. What none of them knew, what Dale Kessler could not have known, grinning behind his cigar, was that Warren had stood in front of that rusted chest with more than 50 years awake in him, and something older besides. The crowd saw a dead lump of iron. Warren saw the strongbox. He saw the hand-forged straps under the rust, the rivet set even and close by a smith who took pride in it, the domed lid hammered true. And he saw the lock, and the lock was wrong for what they were all saying. He had set locks like it. He knew what a blown box looked like, what a forced hasp looked like, the bright torn iron a torch or a bar leaves behind. This lock had none of it. It was rusted down hard, but it had never once been forced. The seam had never been sprung. He had, as a young man, apprenticed at the very forge that hammered and banded chests like it for the old express line, and he knew how a freight strongbox was built, and how a messenger locked one down, and what it meant that a chest that heavy had sat 40 years, sealed the honest way, and never been broken into. The rest of them were pricing the iron by how hard it would be to haul to the crusher. Warren knew the difference between a box that was empty and a box that had never been opened, and what Warren found when he broke that seize lock that night would change how a whole mountain town remembered a man it had called a thief for 40 years. Warren had come up hard. He went to the forge young, learning the fire and the hammer and the long, patient feel of working hot iron until it did what a true hand told it, and across the years made himself into the kind of smith a freight agent or a bank called by name when the work had to hold and had to last. His wife Neva had died after a long illness, and they had buried no family of their own. And after Neva was gone, he lived alone in a small house behind his shop with his tools and his quiet. The town had a use for his hands and no use at all for his memory. He knew that. He bid on the strongbox anyway. He bid because he knew it. A heavy chest sealed the honest way and never forced is a question, and a man who had banded 1,000 true boxes could no more walk past an unbroken lock for scrap than walk past his own past. The crowd had seen a rusted pig. Warren had seen the chest as it was, the straps forged by a proud hand, the rivets set close, the lock rusted down but whole, sealed by somebody who had locked it and not come back. If you've made it this far into Warren's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He let them sell the rest of the estate first, the implements and the furniture and the box lots knocked down to the dealers, while Warren waited at the end of the row beside the heavy chest. When the auctioneer finally came to the iron strongbox and called for a bid, Dale glanced at it, called out his joke, and not one other hand went up. Warren raised one finger, and the gavel came down at 50. He paid in cash at the table, signed the slip, and arranged to bring his flatbed and a chain hoist around at the end of the day, because moving a strongbox that took 2 men to tip was its own afternoon's work, and the auction rules gave a man until dark to haul off what he had bought. The story got around the town before Warren's flatbed was off the county road. By Monday, people who had not spoken 20 words to him in years stopped him outside the feed store to ask, grinning, whether he was going to crack his iron pig or just live behind it. Ed Marsh, who ran the hardware counter, said it plainer than the rest, that there was nothing to an old express chest but 1,000 pounds of rust and a sore back for whoever was fool enough to move it. Warren was buying a can of penetrating oil and a fresh hacksaw blade, and did not look up. "We'll see," he said, and that was the whole of his answer. He had spent 50 years learning that a lock is either forced or it isn't, and the noise a crowd makes has nothing to do with which one. But Warren did not open the chest up in the daylight, with the dealer's truck still on the lot and Dale holding court by the auction table. He waited until the place had emptied out and he had the heavy strongbox home hoisted off the flatbed and set square on his shop floor under a single work lamp, and went at it alone that night after the town had gone quiet and the windows up the street had gone dark. The lock was seized and the lid was rust-frozen, and rather than take a torch to it and ruin what a smith had made, he worked it slow, soaked the hasp and the lock in oil, worked the rust with a wire brush and a pick, read the lock's make and the set of it as it came clean, the way you open a thing somebody else built careful a long time ago, and when the penetrating oil had crept the seized bolt and he had the corroded hasp free at last, he set his shoulder and eased the domed lid up on its stiff old hinges. And the first thing his lamp found was not empty iron, but a flat leather express pouch laid down over something, and beneath the smell of rust the dry cold smell of paper and oilcloth that had waited a long time in the dark. Down at the diner they were still asking if he had found a use for his iron pig yet. Warren set his lamp close and lifted the old express pouch aside the way he would read a joint before he ever set a hammer to it. The strongbox had its own long, sad history, and the town had let it go to scrap with never once asking after it. It ran all the way back to the man who had locked it down on a mountain pass in a killing winter, a young express messenger who decades before carried the payrolls and the gold over the high country for the old freight line that served the mining camps. There had been a bad storm one winter, the pass shut in white, and in the talk that came after. The blame had fallen on the messenger who never came down, a quiet, dependable man accused of running off with a whole mining camp's winter wages and slandered for it ever after. His name spat for 40 years as the expressman who robbed the miners and left their families to go hungry through the cold. What none of them ever asked was what becomes of the truth when the one man who could tell it dies in the snow with it locked in iron beside him. The answer had been sitting on the gravel the whole time, sealed inside a $50 chest nobody wanted to open. Warren worked the last of the rust free and lifted the pouch, and what lay beneath it told him whose chest it was before he ever read a word. Set down in the bottom of the iron chest was a small canvas roll gone stiff with age, and when Warren lifted it, the weight of it ran straight up his arm, and he knew it before he loosed the tie. Gold, a heavy little roll of gold coins. Dull and dark with the years, but unmistakable in the lamp, $20 pieces wrapped and tied by a careful hand. He set them on the bench under the lamp and stood very still. Beside the roll lay a tight bundle wrapped in oilcloth, and Warren worked it free and found a thick roll of old banknotes, gone soft at the folds. Paper money of a kind no bank had printed in his lifetime. A mining camp's whole winter payroll drawn out in cash and never paid. The crowd had priced the whole thing a scrap by how hard it was to haul. Warren stood in his shop with a roll of gold and a roll of old notes in his scarred hands, and understood that the iron pig had been worth a hard winter's wages for 100 families the entire 40 years the town laughed at it. But the gold and the notes were only the start of it. Wedged flat under the leather express pouch against the iron floor of the chest, where no scrapper would ever have reached, was a hand-kept book in a worn cover, a messenger's waybill and ledger, and Warren eased it out and opened it under the lamp, and the back of his neck went cold. It was the run book of the express line, close written in a careful hand, and it was not the empty stripped relic the freight line was said to have scrapped bare. It was the record of a single run that never finished. Every consignment for that trip set down with the date, the amount, and the camp, and the man it was owed to. And there, in the messenger's own hand, was the whole of it, the winter payroll drawn in gold, and notes for the mining camp up the pass, signed out to him to carry, the storm closing the trail, his own last entries, scrawled shorter and colder as the days went, that the pass was shut, that he could not get the pay down, that he had locked it in the iron chest and would guard it in the line shack, till the weather broke rather than let it be lost or taken. On the last page the messenger had written a few quiet lines of his own, that he feared he would not last the cold, that whoever found the chest should know the money was the camp's honest wages and not one coin was his, that it was to go to the families it was drawn for, named man by man in the book, and that he was sorry he could not carry it the last miles down. Warren read it twice through, and the only man in that county who still knew how that old express iron was built and locked now held the proof of a wrongly blamed man's whole honesty in two hands, a payroll saved and guarded to the death, and the honest run book of a duty a town had called a robbery for 40 years. The next morning Warren did not call a single dealer to sell, and did not put the gold up for its melt value, and did not keep one coin of it for himself, and a few in town thought him a fool a second time. He let them. He had spent one whole month being the man who paid $50 for an iron pig, and he did not mind being thought a fool by people who had never once been right about the thing in front of them. He carried the run book first to the County Historical Society, and then to the old express company records that named the lost payroll, and set himself to the harder things, to clear a dead man's name 40 years late, and to find what descendants the mining families had left, and put the payroll's lawful value into their hands, name by name, as the book set them down. The society's keeper went very still over the ledger, and said quietly that a complete express strongbox of that age, with the messenger's own signed run book and an undelivered payroll still sealed under its lid, was the kind of thing a county museum waits a lifetime for and almost never finds whole, and that the man it cleared, who had frozen on the pass, guarding wages that were never his, was no thief at all, but the one man in the whole sorry business who had done exactly right. And the families the run book named had descendants in the county still, miners' grandchildren and great-grandchildren scattered across the same hard valleys their people had worked, families who had grown up on the story of the winter the pay never came, and the expressman who ran off with it. Warren went to them that winter with the run book open to the messenger's last signed lines, and watched a gray mountain woman read her own grandfather's name in the column of men owed a winter's wages beside the messenger's own words that he had died trying to bring it down. She put a hand flat on the table and went quiet. They had grown up believing a man had robbed their people and left them to a hungry winter. The run book told them instead that he had guarded their wages with his life and lost it only to the snow. The woman asked the old blacksmith why he had troubled to come so far and give back what he could have melted and kept. Warren said only that the messenger had locked the truth in iron where nobody could call it stolen, and set the lock with an honest hand so it would keep until somebody came who could read old iron and open it right, and that he had nobody of his own to leave a thing to, so he had brought the dead man's honest work, and the dead man's good name, home to the people they were always meant for. There was one thing more Warren did before the heavy chest left his shop, and he did it for the slandered messenger and for no one else. He cleaned and oiled the iron strongbox the slow, careful way over a week of nights, freed the rusted hinges, and eased the domed lid to swinging true, and knocked the scale off the good forged straps. not to make a show of it, but because a thing an honest smith had built heavy and true to guard 100 families' wages deserved to stand whole. And he did not clean the lock and cut a new key to it and lock his own tools and cash away inside and use it for a strong box, because using it to keep his own valuables was the most ordinary thing in the world, the very thing 100 plain chests could do. And there was no truth in it. The truth was the payroll a dying man had guarded, and the run book he kept honest in the cold, and the name it gave back to a man the town had called a thief. So on the last night, with the museum's people coming in the morning, Warren stood the heavy strongbox square in the middle of his shop under the work lamp, the domed lid propped open, and the iron chest empty. The run book and the banknotes and the roll of gold set careful before it, and looked at it a long, quiet while, and then switched off the lamp and let it rest. He had not set a new lock on the iron pig to guard his own tools. That part was never the point. He had opened it so that the man the town had slandered and the honest duty he died doing would be known one time by somebody who finally understood what he was. That winter the iron strongbox and the run book went where they belonged, into the county historical hall, with the messenger's name read clear at last in the old express company record, and the payroll's lawful value and the banknotes went to the mining family's descendants the book helped him find, 40 years late. Exactly as the dying messenger's last page asked. Word of it went around the town the same as the laughter had, only quieter. And the people who had called Warren a fool let the name the iron pig drop and did not pick it up again. Dale Kessler was not run out of business and was not made a villain. He was simply a man who had laughed loud at a thing he never bothered to look at. And the next time he held court by the auction table the others did not lean in so far. Warren never said a word against him. Being right was the whole of what he had wanted, and it had brought a wronged man's name and the honest duty he died doing back up out of 40 years of being called a thief. The museum kept the heavy chest where the town could see it. They set the great iron strongbox on a low platform behind a rail in the front hall under a soft light. The iron oiled and whole, the domed lid standing open the way Warren had left it, the forged straps clean and dark again, the messenger's name cut at last into a plate at its foot, Silas Rourke, express messenger, who died on the pass guarding wages that were never his, cleared at last. And beside it the open run book turned to the last signed lines, and a card that told whoever came through that the man this chest cleared had frozen in a lined shack, keeping 100 families' winter pay out of the snow, had stolen nothing, and had been called a robber for 40 years to feel the silence his death left. And on a still evening that next spring, the light going gold through the tall front windows, Warren Cole drove over to look in on it, and there, in the last of the sun, stood the iron strongbox, whole and lit and seen at last, the open lid catching the light where a stranger's hands had finally reached it. Warren was 72 years old, a man the auction had laughed at one whole month. And he stood quiet a long moment and laid one broad scarred hand flat on the cool oiled iron and nodded once, the way a man nods at a job that was done right. The work had said it for him, the way work always did. A smith locks a thing in iron and sets the lock with his own hand and trusts that somebody will come who can read what is sealed there, so that being blamed for 40 years can never be the same as having done the thing, and a town rarely knows what was made true in its own old iron until somebody troubles to open the thing they laughed at. So I'll leave it to you. Was Warren Cole right to give the gold and the banknotes back to the miners' families and the strongbox to a museum without keeping a single coin? Or was that one decency too far in a world that had laughed at him for nothing? Tell me which one in the comments, and I'll read them.